Hello student, welcome to the Darasa Online. I'm Adugegema, a biology teacher. I'm going to present to you in biology a topic of coordination. Biology subject, a topic of coordination. Coordination in a subtopic of nerve impulse. This is our area of concentration today. The coordination, this is among of the characteristics of the living organism, through which different body organs they are linked together to perform the same function or an activity. So the body organ, they communicate so as to bring efficient functions in the body. The communication in the body is done by specialized cells. These cells are known as neurons or nerve cells. The nerve cells, they carry message from one body part to another body part. The message which are carried by these neurons are known as nerve impulse, and that is our area of concentration today. Before we proceed with our discussion, let us see the guiding questions. Question number 1. The question reads, how is the neuron adapted for transmission of nerve impulse? How is a neuron? A neuron, we say this is a specialized cell. How it is adapted to transmission? The major function of the transmission of nerve impulse is done by the neuron. But apart from that, the neurons, they have also other functions. The major functions of the neuron, the functions of the neuron are as follows. 1. The neurons, they receives the external and the internal changes. External and internal body changes. That is the stimuli. Changes the stimuli, the finger, this is the stimulus. The stimuli, this is any change which occur in the outside or inside the body of an organism. It can be change due to heat, change due to mechanical, change due to electrical, change due to sound, and the other energy of that nature. So after receiving, they change, they convert the stimuli, converts the stimuli into electrical impulse, or is what we call the nerve impulse. Then the third function is transmission of the nerve impulse. This is from the receptor to the central nervous system. The central nervous system, this is comprises mainly of the brain and the spinal cord, whose major function is interpretation of the message brought by the neuron. Then, from the central nervous system, the nerve impulses are also carried to the effectors. The effector, this is the body organ, whose major function is to take the response in appropriate to the nature of the stimuli. And the examples of the effector, these are muscles and glands. So the muscles respond in appropriate with the stimuli. Also the gland will respond appropriately. Dear student, then let us see the adaptation of the neuron to the function they perform. We have mentioned the three functions. Then let us see the adaptation. The first adaptations of the neuron. The first adaptation, the neuron is like other body cells. They contain a nucleus in which they contain cell body. The cell body, this is the part of the neuron where the nucleus and the other cell organelles are found. So the major function of the cell body, it coordinates all activities of the neuron, and it contains a large cytoplasm where there are nutrients to nourish the neuron. So apart from controlling all activities of the neuron, the cell body acts as a nutritional center to feed the cell. That is the advantage of having the cell body. Another thing, the neuron contains dendrites. Dendrites. The dendrites, these are the projections from the cell body, whose major function is to receive the impulse and transmit them toward the cell body. So they are there to receive. And the dendrites, they are very many in number. So many in number means increase the chances of carrying the information from different sources to the cell body. Another part or another feature, this is the axon. The axon, this is the thin, long fiber like, which projects from the cell body. The major function of the axon is to conduct or to transmit nerve impulse away from the cell body to the effector or to the central nervous system or to the other neuron. That is the third feature. So the long the axon, the transmission, the long and the large the diameter of the axon ensure efficient transmission. Another adaptation, the neurons cell body contains large number of the mitochondria. They have many mitochondria. The mitochondria, this is the cell organelles whose major function is a site for the respiration, where energy is synthesized. So having many number of mitochondria means there is efficient production of energy. And the energy is needed by the neuron for the active transport of the ions. Because there is ions exchange across the axon membrane, which is an active transport. Another thing, the neurons, they possess small pores, namely gated channels. Presence of the gated channels. The gated channels, these are the specific path where different ions pass through. There are gated channels for the sodium, specifically for the sodium ions. The sodium ion tend to pass into the axon membrane and outside. There are also the potassium gated channels. There are chlorine gated channels. So these channels act as the pathway or the route through where the ions pass during the transmission of the nerve impulse. Another thing, number 6, another feature which facilitates efficient function of the neuron is the squam cell, presence of squam cell. Presence of the squam cell. The squam cell, this is present in some neurons. Some neurons they do not have. Particularly the myelinated axon contain squam cell. The major function of the squam cell is the secretion of the myelin sheaths. And the myelin sheaths, these are the fat material whose major function is to insulate the axon and speed up the transmission of the nerve impulse. Hence, the presence of this ensures the increase in the velocity or speed of the nerve impulse compared to the axons which do not possess the myelin sheaths. Also, the neurons are highly packed at the terminal dendria of the axon or the synaptic knob. They are highly packed with chemical substance known as neurotransmitter. Neurotransmitter. The neurotransmitter, these are the special chemical substances which carry nerve impulse across the synapse. So they carry from the presynaptic knob to the postsynaptic knob. So the presence of this facilitates the passage of the nerve impulse across the synapse. The synapse simply, this is the gap between one neuron and another neuron. So understanding this feature and the advantage, this is the adaptation of the neuron to the function it performs. And the major function of the neuron is transmission of the nerve impulse. To this moment, I hope now you are now comfortable with the question that how the neurons are adapted for transmission of the nerve impulse. Because it demands you to explain the features the neuron possesses which relate to its efficient function. Dear student, let us see question number 2 of this presentation. The question reads, briefly explain how Each of the following occurs during transmission of nerve impulses. A. Polarization. B. Depolarization. And C. Repolarization. These are used in nerve transmission, and they are mainly characterized by ions change or change in ion concentration. So before we answer this question, we must first understand the distribution of the ions across the axon membrane. Ion distribution. Ions distribution. In the axon membrane. The axon is a piece or a part of the neuron which is characterized by electrochemical potential. It is charged with positive ions outside when at rest and negative ions inside when it is at rest. So the outside of the membrane of the axon is positively charged, and the inside it is negatively charged. So it possesses electrochemical gradient. It is positively charged outside due to the presence of the sodium ions. The sodium ions are many in the outside. So there are many sodium ions in the outside. Dear student, it is not means that only sodium ions are found at the outside of the axon. The outside of the axon is highly accumulated with sodium ions and the chloride ions. That's the thing to understand. So it is positively charged because the net charge is positive, meaning that there are many sodium ions than the chloride ions. But all the two, they are there. So the net charge becomes positive. Likewise, the inside, it is occupied by the potassium ions. These are the cations. Also, there are negatively charged proteins. Negatively charged proteins. So it is net negative inside because there are many negatively charged proteins than the potassium ion. So there are only 4 ions which account for the ion distribution across the axon membrane. That is sodium ion, chloride ion, potassium ion, and the negatively charged protein ions. Then let us go back to our question number 2. Then how now depolarization occur? Depolarization, this is the change in potential difference across the axon membrane when at rest, during when it is positively charged outside and negatively charged inside. That is the polarization This occurs during resting potential. Resting potential. Meaning that it occurs during when there is no conduction of the nerve impulse, where the axon membrane is more electropositive, outside and more electronegative inside. That is when the axon membrane contains more cations outside than the inside. That situation is described as polarization. And the membrane with large concentration of cation outside and small concentration of cations or high concentration of anions inside, it is described as polarized membrane. The membrane is said to be polarized. The situation is said to be polarization. And actually, during this condition, the potential difference is 0 because it is at rest. During when the potential difference inside is negative 70 millivolt, and the potential difference outside is positive 70 millivolt. And hence, the potential difference, the negative and the positive, they cancel out. So the net charge or the net potential difference is approximately to 0 millivolt, because the number of positive ions and the negative ions are equal across the membrane, inside and the outside. So the membrane is described as is at resting potential, and the membrane is polarized. Dear student, depolarization is caused by disturbance. It is the opposite of polarization. Depolarization. Depolarization, this is the change in the potential difference across the axon membrane during when the axon is negatively charged outside and positively charged inside. This happens during when the axon is stimulated by a stimulus. Or in other words, we say it occurs across the axon membrane during when the nerve impulses are conducted, or when the nerve impulses are passing through the axon, or they are passing along the axon. So the sodium ions from the outside, they tend to enter into inside the axon. So the axon plasma become more positively charged compared to the outside. Meaning that the sodium ions which were outside after the disturbance, the gutted channels for the sodium ions, they open, allowing the sodium to enter into the axoplasma, making positive charged inside and the negative charged outside. This situation is what we call the depolarization. And the membrane exhibiting this condition, the membrane is said to be depolarized membrane. Depolarized membrane. So depolarized membrane is different from the polarized membrane. And simply because of the ion distribution. This is a positively charged outside and a negatively charged inside, whereby the depolarized membrane, it is negatively charged outside and a positively charged inside. And this happened during the transmission of the nerve impulses, but this occurs during when the nerve impulses are not conducted. Dear student, the third term, that is repolarization. The repolarization, this is the recovery. Repolarization. This is the recovery or regaining of the axon plasma to its origin after the passage of the nerve impulse. So during this situation, the axon membrane is described as positively charged outside and negatively charged inside. But the difference with the polarization or polarized membrane, it is positively charged outside by potassium ions. So the potassium ions, after the passage of the nerve impulse, they leave the axon plasma to the outside. So this membrane is said to be repolarized. Repolarized membrane. The repolarized membrane is positively charged outside and negatively charged inside. The difference with the polarized membrane is the repolarized membrane is positively charged by potassium ions outside, whereby the polarized membrane, it is positively charged outside by sodium ions. So the difference is ions distribution. And this happens after the conduction of the nerve impulses. When the nerve impulses has been conducted, then the neuron, it has to restore to its origin or to regain its polarity. Dear student, after knowing this, let us have a short break. Then when we come back, we'll see another question number 3. Dear student, welcome once again to our period, which is all about nerve impulses. Let us see the question number 3 of this presentation. The question reads, describe the mechanism of transmission of nerve impulse along the axon. The transmission along the axon. The axon, this is a part of the nerve cell which transmits the nerve impulse from the cell body or away from the cell body to the other neuron or to the central nervous system. Dear student, the mechanism of transmission is as follows. First, the axon membrane, when it is at rest, the axon membrane, when it is at rest, is positively charged outside. Assuming this is our axon membrane, it is positively charged outside with the sodium ions and negatively charged inside. Likewise, both sides, positively charged outside and negatively charged inside. Dear student, when we were discussing the ion distribution, I said the outside, it is positively charged by sodium ions, meaning that the sodium ions are many in number on the axon membrane, while the inside the axon there are also cations, the potassium cations, but the cations are few in number compared with the negatively charged protein. So it is net negatively charged inside and it is net positively outside. So it is at this condition. This condition is described as the membrane is at resting potential, meaning that the potential difference is 0. That is, the outside is positively charged by this millivolt and the inside is negatively charged by the same millivolt. And the membrane at this situation is said to be polarized. It is said to be polarized. The situation that is described as polarization. Then, when the nerve or the axon is stimulated, there will be redistribution of charges. When the axon is stimulated, the sodium gated channels open, causing the influx of sodium ions into the axon plasma. The influx of the sodium ions is along the concentration gradient, meaning that they move from the area of high concentration to the area of low concentration. But they pass through specific channels known as sodium gated channels. So when the axon is stimulated, the sodium ion gated channels open, allowing the sodium ions to rush into the axon membrane. Dear student, we can describe this ionic movement in this situation. Let us assume this is the nerve impulse or stimulus. When this part is stimulated, This part is stimulated. The ions, the sodium ions, tend to move into the axon plasma for that piece of the axon which is stimulated. The sodium ions get into the axon, leaving a net negative charge outside, a net negative charge outside. So here, the membrane now is depolarized. It is depolarized simply because the sodium ions now they have rushed into the axon plasma. So at this situation, the axon inside it is now positively charged. There are many cations due to the influx of sodium ions. And this piece is conducting the nerve impulse. So the situation now, it is described as an action potential. This is an action potential. The action potential, this is the potential difference across the axon membrane when it is conducting the nerve impulses, where it is more electropositive inside and more electronegative outside. But the remaining piece, this is negatively charged inside, positively charged outside, negatively charged inside, positively charged outside. So the part of the axon where the stimulus has not yet reached, it is still at resting potential. Therefore, the change of this ion creates the so-called local circuit. The local circuit, these are built between the ions. So the positively charged ions and the negative charged ions, they create a local circuit. Also here, there are local circuit created. Here there is local circuit. So this local circuit, they induce a neighbor part of the axon to be stimulated. And hence, the action potential will move from this part and cause stimulation to the next part. And the axon membrane will be in this situation. Assuming this is the axon membrane. The axon membrane, here the action potential has passed. Now it has reached somewhere. When the action potential reaches at a certain piece of the axon, it is depolarized. The sodium gated channels open and the sodium ion get into the axon plasma. So inside now it is positively charged. It is positively charged with sodium ions, positively charged with sodium ions. Outside it is negatively charged. It is more electronegative outside, more electronegative outside. But the remaining part where the nerve impulses has not reached, it's still at resting potential. where it is more electropositive outside and more electronegative inside. Dear student, this membrane is polarized. This is polarized. This is depolarized. But after the passage of the nerve impulses to a part of the axon, the sodium ions remain inside because after the passage of the nerve impulse, the sodium gets the channels closed. So the sodium ions remains inside. But the potassium gets the channels open. The potassium gets the channels, allowing the potassium ions to leave the axon plasma. So now, the axon membrane, it is positively charged outside due to the outflux of the potassium ions. And this membrane is described as a repolarized membrane. It is during when the axon membrane starts to restore its polarity or restoration of its origin. But in the area where the action potential, also there will be a creation of the lock circuit. The lock circuit are created. There are creation of the lock circuit. This lock circuit, they will induce a stimulation of the neighbor axon piece. Then the action potential or the nerve impulse will move from this part and run to the next. This will continue. When the action potential reaches here, then another local circuit is created. So the creation of the local circuit tends to depolarize the axon membrane, causing the opening of the sodium gut channels and the sodium rush into the axon plasma. And when they rush into is when the membrane becomes more electronegative outside and more electropositive inside. And that is described as the action potential. So this will continue till the end of the axon. And this exchange of ions is very rapid. It takes place within a fraction of seconds. Very rapid. So then, when the axon is at this situation, a so-called the sodium-potassium pump. The sodium-potassium pump, which is located on the axon membrane. It is located on the axon membrane. The sodium-potassium pump, in the presence of the sodium-potassium antipathy, in the presence of the sodium-potassium antipathy enzyme, is activated. That is, the sodium-potassium pump on the surface of the axon membrane is activated by the sodium-potassium antipathy enzyme. The major function of this pump is to transfer, to take the sodium ions outside and the potassium ions inside. And this happens in order to restore the normal charge distribution of the axon. So the 3 sodium ions will be taken out and 2 potassium ions will be taken in. At the end, all the sodium ions will be outside and all the potassium will get inside. And after the repolarization, the membrane now become polarized. So that is the transmission of the nerve impulses, how it takes place. So it is all about the charge distribution. That after the passage, the potassium will leave the axon, creating a repolarized membrane. Then after, when the potassium ions and the repolarized ends, is when the active pump, the sodium potassium pump, is activated, which take all the sodium ions outside and the potassium inside to restore the normal state of the axon plasma. Dear student, to explain this concept, you need to understand stage by stage. You need to understand the polarization, you need to understand the depolarization, and you need to understand the repolarization. What happens during this event? During polarization is when the membrane is at resting potential, no conduction. During depolarization is when the axon membrane is stimulated. The nerve impulses are passing. During when the axon membrane is more electropositive inside and more electronegative outside, due to the influx of the sodium ions following or along the concentration gradient. Then after the passage of the action potential, this membrane tends to restore its normal charge distribution. That is the transmission. I hope to this moment now you are able to differentiate the polarized membrane, repolarized membrane, and the depolarized membrane. You are now to differentiate or to explain the 3 terms: polarization, repolarization, and the depolarization. And also, you must be in a position to differentiate between the action potential and resting potential. The action potential, sometimes this is described as a nerve impulse, because it happens in the potential difference which occur during when the nerve impulse is passing, during when the axon membrane is negatively charged outside and positively charged inside. Dear student, the transmission of the nerve impulses is not hard like you think. It is very simple if you follow these stages. Thank you very much for following my presentation, for following the Darasa Online's presentation. Welcome for the next presentation on my biology subject. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching. Thank you. Bye.